and be vengeful like a snake, this is obviously not the type of vengefulness that the Torah is warning us not to have, because, as it says in the line, this is just referring to the Nakim of Natira Hamachayeves, the Talmud Chacham Einu Bishvil Mammon. The type of vengefulness that the Talmud Chacham is obligated in is not over money or material matters. Oh, Haba'i de Mammon, or something that comes around because, like, through money. No, it's not directly vengeful for money or some kind of thing that leads to money. Makom Makomar is a Nakim of a Natira. It's still called vengefulness. But there's a big condition on the Talmud Chacham's vengefulness. And what is the condition? Sheyeh Talmud Chacham dafka. In other words, he has to be a Talmud Chacham. And what is a Talmud Chacham? We said, I asked you this question at the end of last class. What is a Talmud Chacham? What's the definition of those words? We all think we know what it is, but it's like a Torah scholar, right? But what it really means, if you like the actual words, Talmid Chacham means he's a student of Chochmah, right? What is Chochmah, right? And a student of Chochmah means that he's tafel elaha. He's secondary to it. He gets out of the way and leaves room for it, making it the primary thing. Hainu dekol asiyosa vinyana, which means all of his doings and all of his matters. Who bishvila chachma? It's for the sake of chachma, right? Shizev b'chlalus inyan hanitzachum. So what does it mean to be anyway chachma? Chachma is bittul, right? Chachma comes to the letters of koach ma. So the idea that to be a Talmud Chacham is not what it actually could be the exact opposite of what maybe some people think it is, which is to be some kind of scholarly great man. And the scholarliness is good if it's done in the right way. In other words, if it's peppered with the proper amount of true bittul and yirat shamayim and humbleness. If not, the scholarliness can be the actual opposite of a Talmud Chacham, because it could make you arrogant, right? What's that?
He puts his own opinion into account.
I'm sorry?
He puts his own opinion into what it like.
Exactly. He puts his own opinion, and he's not really doing it l'shem shamayim. He's doing it in order to sort of be smarter or dominate the next guy, right? Whereas in a certain sense, a Talmud Chacham does have to be smarter and dominate the next. A true Talmud Chacham has to be smarter and dominate the next guy. But why? Not because of him, because of Chochmah, because of bittul. In other words, if on the other hand, if you are bittul to Chochmah, what is Chochmah? Reuven and I were actually having this conversation the other day. You asked me outside. Chochmah is a very unique sphira. It's the first of all the spheros. And what is its uniqueness to the other 9, really the other 10, including Kesser, is that you switch the letters around, it says Koach Ma. What is Koach Ma?
The power of what?
The power of what? Which is a kind of a confusing thing. What is the power of what, right? So first of all, we had just in the pasuk in last week's parsha that Moshe Rabbeinu says Nachnu Ma, right? He says, what are we that you're going to complain to us? Your complaint is not to us, it's to Hashem. You're looking at me thinking that there's somebody here? No. Ma is in my place. In other words, what? Bittul is in my place. I'm not having my own opinions. I'm just a shliach of Hashem. So the sphera called Koach Ma, in general, the word Koach is that there's something called the 10 Kochos. Each sphera is called a Koach, a power. The difference between Chochmah and all the other spheros is all the other spheros are a positive description of a thing, right? That if you have Bina, you have the ability to basically like build ideas. Bina comes from the word boneh. You can take something and you can create, a structure out of ideas. If you have chesed, right, you're magnanimous. Gevur, you have discipline. Each one is like a description of a quality. Chochmah is a very strange description of a quality. It's a being of a power whose function is to not be there. Why do you need such a power? Because why is it Reishis Chochmah, the first of all the spheros? Because Hashem wants to bring Ein Sof into a creation, right? In other words, the whole idea of Chochmah is it's the bridge between infinity and the worlds. It's the first of the spheros. So Hashem is trying to basically enter inside of objects. The problem is, if any object would be the first recipient of this, how are you going to bring infinity in contact with that object? The object has its own finite boundaries and would therefore not be able to contain infinity. So the first sphera he had to make, therefore, was an entity which has no finite boundaries. It is a thing. It's not pure or Ein Sof. It's a kli. It's a koach, but it's a koach of ma. Its function is to not be there. So it's like this source of the concept of humility. It's our ability to take ourselves out of something, to get out of the way, to empty yourself, right? So like the way of looking at it is almost like in a wall. It's like the window, right? It's a thing. You can measure it. It has a shape. But its function is to not be there, right? It's to not be part of the world. It's an absence so that Ein Sof can have a way to reside inside of something.
That's true on each level.
That's what Chokhmah is. In every sphere. Every like Chokhmah of Chesed, Chokhmah of Gevurah. Everything has to have a Chokhmah in Kedusha in order to exist, right? Because otherwise, where is it able to gain the very essence of energy of its existence in order to be? So once you have the light coming into the world, then you can color it and shape it as a bina or a chesed or a gevura. But it first has to have like an underlying existence, and that is basically allowing Hashem in. You following this?
Right.
Yeah.
When you say that it's like that it's kind of like a window, right? So
Yeah.
how does it contain the infinite light if it's not infinite itself? Meaning, if you said that like chachma is not infinite, so then how can it contain infinite light?
It's a good question. It is, in a certain sense, infinite. It's compared to a point, right? Sometimes we call chachma a point, right? And the idea of a point is that it doesn't. A true mathematical point does not actually take up any space. It's a theoretical concept, right? If you actually draw a point with a pencil on a paper, that's not a real point because you can somehow measure that. It's just a symbol for this concept of a point, which basically is a thing, right? In other words, as opposed to infinity, the point is basically pointing you in the direction of something finite, but at the same time, that finite point is defined mathematically as taking up zero space, right? And so it actually does contain infinity in it, because if it had a shape or a boundary, then it would not be chokhmah, right? It's just like the true concept of like a mathematical point. But the difference between chokhmah and the other infinity that chokhmah is trying to contain is that it's just that chokhmah is the containment of infinity. An example of this would be the Torah, right? We have hafoch ba the kulaba. It says in Pirkei Avos, turn it because everything's in it, right? And the Torah literally contains everything. It contains the pshat, remez, drush, sod. Right? You can never get to the bottom of this book. It's only 600,000 letters. It's actually less, like 300,000 letters, right? And we're carrying it around, dying for this book because it's God, right? But it's not. How are you going to fit all that big God in a tiny little book, right? That's what Reb Azusha said about the Tanya, right? So the point is that it is infinity, but it's infinity's ability to be, so to speak, contained, to express itself in some finite way. Now, in Chokhmah itself, Chokhmah Batzilus, let's say, the truth is that it's all of infinity inside of a point. This is like, and that's why it's, in a certain sense, Chokhmah is more wondrous than the Ein Sof itself, right? Because God's ability to have infinity be contained is more wondrous than infinity being unleashed and uncontained, right? Because now you're fusing two opposites together. You're saying that it's infinite and you're saying that it's containable. Well, usually something which is containable is not infinite, right? So there's finite and there's infinite, and then there's Chokhmah. And Chokhmah is the infinite somehow in a finite form, like the Torah, which is it has beginning and an end, and yet it has no beginning and end because everything is contained inside that point. In other words, if you would start to unleash that point and allow it to express itself, and what's the purpose of Chokhmah? One could ask, right? Because now when you express things from Chokhmah, each thing that comes out of Chokhmah comes out through the filter of having been in a point, so it can bring forth infinite number of things, but each thing is now going to be finite. Whereas the Ein Sof would try to express things without filtering through Chokhmah, everything would be infinite, everything would be one. There would be no, basically, way for the things inside of infinity to express themselves, because they would all be like, basically nullified inside of the infinite quality. The fact that infinity sort of goes through this filter of Chokhmah and then comes out, it still shows infinity on the other side. But everything that's going to come out is now bound in through the filter of going through a finite boundary. Does that make sense?
I just don't get how does a filter contain the infinity?
It's a power of God. It's something that can't be, an example cannot be found in this world except for the Torah, right? I'm having this argument with a very bright friend of mine, a cousin of mine, and he's just back and forth on this. He cannot get this through his head, right? Because it shouldn't be. It's only a theoretical concept. Just like a mathematical point is only a theoretical concept. Only God can do this. In other words, in theory, one would have to admit that God can do anything, right? Just like we think God can be infinite. Well, I'll one up you. The infinite God can also express himself as a finite thing, and inside the finite, it contains his infinite. He can't do that, right?
Yeah, if he couldn't do that, then it wouldn't truly be infinite either.
Right. So this is actually what we have a whole conversation about this called Makom Ha'aron Eino Min Hamida. Right. We talk about the idea of the Aron Kodesh in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, that it takes up a finite space. The Aron was 2.5 amos wide and 1.5 amos tall, right? And yet when you measured it, you know the story, right? When you measured it in the base of Mikdash, it didn't take up any space. So here's an object, and this is a perfect example for Chokhmah. Perfect. And, I mean, sometimes it refers to Kesser as well, but it's a perfect example of what we're saying for Chokhmah. It is a thing, it's a finite thing, and you can measure it and, so to speak, takes up space. And at the same time, its concept is that it takes up space. It's an distance whose function is a negation of something. Fit there. What else fits there? The infinite Ein Sof God, right? The miracle of the Aron Kodesh fits there, right? So this is what Chokhmah does. It's like Hashem's tool to enable the Ein Sof to express itself. And this is basically the best metaphor is the Torah itself. Are we closer to the understanding this? So when it says a Talmid Chacham, it's very important now that we understand what Chachma is. What's a Talmid? What's a student of Chachma? Is that you are grabbing onto that midah. So instead of walking around with your own opinions, you're walking around with Hashem's opinions. You don't have your own opinions. Instead of walking around doing your thing, you're walking around doing His thing. You get yourself out of the way. You adopt, basically. You adopt the sphere of Chachma. You're there, but you're not there. You empty yourself out of self, but that itself is a quality. So you're learning continuously from Chokhmah. Now, if that's the case, then you have the right to be vengeful, because it's not your vengeance, right? You are like Chokhmah, and its truth is defending itself in this world, right? God's not a pushover. In fact, when God's not a pushover, He calls Himself Hashem Tzivakos, right? The name of Hashem for war. He's going to drown all the Egyptians in the sea because Bittul is walking over here, and arrogance will basically be nullified before it if it's strong enough. If it's a quality of Chokhmah which is strong enough to actually defend itself, then you have to be a Talmid Chacham to have it, and you're not called a Talmid Chacham unless you possess it. Because basically, you're not really allowing the light to come in under any circumstances. If something will oppose you, then your Chokhmah won't come through. So then you're not really a student of Chokhmah. It has to come through under all means necessary. You getting this? I'm not hearing a lot of yeses out there. Yeah! Yes. All right. So moving on. So therefore, please take it from the next line. It starts with HaChokhmah. Zeru b'chlalus in nitzachon. This is the general concept of nitzachon, war, victory. And we said nitzachon hu begadol dafka. Only a great person has the quality of nitzachon, because if you're not great, you'll lose, right? And then you won't be victorious. V'komi shegadu yosem midas nitzachon hu biyoster etzlo, right? V'komi shegadu. So anyone who's greater, the greater you are, the definition of that is the more nitzachon you have, right? And this doesn't have to be drowning Egyptians in the sea. It could be getting out of bed. It's overcoming your Yetzer Hara. A big man, a winner. What the winner? They say practice makes perfect, or discipline, right? His ability to continue to win. No, this guy, it's not just luck and talent and good looks. He gets up at 5:30 in the morning every time. He wins that battle every single time, right? And when it comes to sitting and learning, his concentration is there. He doesn't get up and run off his seat and grab a coffee every 5 seconds. He's winning. He's a big man. The bigger you are, the bigger your midah of nitzachon, of your victory. V'lechein, who's the biggest? Hamelech shegadol mikol ha'am. The king has to be the biggest. If the king's not the biggest, he's not the king. Because what makes him the king, right? They call it the goat, right? What makes him the king is that he always wins every single time, right? If he didn't, he's definitely not the king. If someone else in his kingdom beats him, then that person's the king. And if someone outside the kingdom beats him, they don't have a kingdom anymore at all. He's even the king because he's winning everybody around him, inside and out. Yeah.
So with David, it seemed like at one point he was kind of like running away, and someone sort of took over. Like
no one took over. They
tried.
Well, a king can fight wars. A king can be attacked. But David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam, he won, and his children won after him. And in other words, you're right. It's not that the king is the king because he doesn't get challenged. He's the king because he does get challenged and he wins. All the wars of David were won by David. Every single last one of them. He was challenged. He was attacked. He was on the ropes, but he won, right? So Melech is the biggest guy we have. Dezeu mailas hamelech. That is what a melech is. Who bachir ha'am is the choice of the people. V'gadol mihem, and greater than them. As it says regarding Shaul, the first king, right? It says, quote, "Ve'ein ish from Yisrael tov mimenu." It's defining the king. No man amongst the Jewish people was as good as him. Mishichmo l'mayla gavo mikol am. And literally in his case, but it's also metaphorically for every other king after him, from his shoulder and above, he was higher than every man. There was every other person only came up to his shoulder. He was just literally bigger than everybody. And that's why with him, he has this quality of nitzachon, winning, victory, more. And what does it mean to win? To have his will and his desire come out and be revealed above anybody else's. In other words, no, my idea will prevail. You have ideas, I know your ideas are good. And this is the concept basically of the story of Misnagdim and Hasidim. You know, we have this tradition that we continually remember the history of the Misnagdim. Even though the Rebbe said definitively there are no Misnagdim anymore, right? Real opponents of Hasidus. There's jerks, but there's no real opponents of Hasidus anymore. Real opponents of Hasidus means they had like a justifiable in their minds, Torah backed up, thesis as to why the whole Torahs of Hasidus should not come out. And it's like, basically, it was like your will versus my will. Mr. Vilna Gaon versus Mr. Baal Shem Tov, right? And it's like, no, in theory, this is a Torah conversation, mamash l'shem shamayim. We're saying that what you're doing is going to ruin the Jewish people. It's some kind of a transgression on the laws of preserving the sanctity of the secrets of the Torah. And we are like Gaonim in Torah, and we've researched this matter in full. And the answer is no. And not only no, but we're going to put you in Cherem, which they did. Why does the Rebbe say that there's no such thing as a misnagid anymore? Because there's no rabbi in the world left today who's on the level of actually having a valid Torah backup to say that Torah Chassidus should not be learned. That's why it is learned everywhere in the world. And anyone who opposes it now, they're just opposing because they have a chip on their shoulder, not because they have a valid Torah reason. It's already come through challenge and victory, right? There's no base din in the world today is going to say you have to burn your Tanya. You have to hide it. You cannot learn it. Can't be, right? There's people who are angry about people learning Tanya, but just that's all it is. And why? Because revealing your will and being victorious is the sign of the king, right? In other words, like Baal Shem Tov was saying, no, I think otherwise. I think it should be learned. And I think it has to be learned. And it's coming. And there is literally a battle of thoughts. And there was a winner in that battle. It's called Nitzachon. And that's what a melech is. By the way, we just had in the Rambam yesterday that I was talking to someone, he's not in this room at the moment, but a student, and he was saying that we have whatever. It was a little bit of a fiery conversation, but he was talking about the concept of can there be a Mashiach, someone you can call Mashiach, who's not actually an anointed king, right? Because he's supposed to be a melech, right? And with all the fancy words, if we don't have someone who's mamash a king, how can you even put him as a candidate, right? For he has to be anointed. So in the Rambam yesterday, he wrote there that the Rosh Galusa, there's a person called the head of the Galus, which is like a Jewish king in the time of Gadol. It's a halachic thing, and it says Bimkom Melechu. He is in the place of a king. Mamish, there can be an actual king who is not dressed in kingly robes, is not anointed. He has the power to appoint judges. He has the power of life and death in his hands. And we learn it because it says that the Shevet will not be ever taken away from the tribe of Yehuda, which means this quality of kingship in Yehuda, it exists at all times. There is a melech, right, amongst the Jewish people. And how do you point him out? Because his will ultimately drive the entire Jewish nation. What he wants is going to happen. Right? So if it doesn't happen, if you have a guy who's standing there claiming to be the king, and he's crying and kicking and screaming that there should be no Hasidus learned in this world, you can be sure that guy's not the king, because it is learned in this world. That opinion and that view did not win. So this is a person that brings out his will and his desire, and it happens. Yeah.
You would say that the only one had a valid Torah opinion to be a Hasidus?
Definitely. In his time, this was, again, an incorrect, right, opinion. But in a certain sense, he was defending the Torah in a healthy way, because someone who's going to bring a chiddush to the to Am Yisrael, he is supposed to meet resistance. You can't, because if he didn't, every Tom, Dick, and Harry would start their own religion. It's very malleable, manipulatable stuff. You know, they did start a few religions based on looking at the Torah slightly different than the way the Jews look at it. So anytime a person's going to come and say, Torah chadash me'iti teitzei. There's a brand new Torah I'm going to spring on you people, and it's going to totally change the laws of everything we understood up until now. In other words, the prohibition on learning Pnimius Torah is now completely uplifted, taken off. Well, excuse me, you're going to just break the laws? So yes, it would be l'shem shamayim and a valiant effort to try to defend that. But if the king is in the game, you won't be able to. He'll show you, not by force, by bittul, by chokhmah, by showing you a greater measure of Torah that will ultimately overtake the conversation. But resistance is necessary, right? And by the way, resistance is necessary not just because to defend the honor of the Torah. Resistance is necessary for the reason we said before. In order for Hasidus to come out, it needed to be resisted. Because as we said before, the true essence of a person's powers only comes out when there is an opponent. That's why we keep the misnagdim in the conversation until this very day. We're the ones that are talking about them. Because when we talk about Hasidus, we have to talk about its ability to overcome an opponent. Right? That's what we just had in the Torah yesterday, last pasuk. We have a mitzvah to remember Amalek. Well, if we have a mitzvah to remember Amalek and destroy him, then we're never really destroying him, because we're always remembering that we have to destroy him. We're the ones keeping him in the game. Trust me. Look what it says over there. It's Yechalosh Yoshua. It says Yoshua weakened Amalek in this battle, which means he killed all the strong ones and he let the weak ones go. Why in the world would you do that to a nation that you're supposed to eternally destroy? Right? We beat the strong ones. All that was left was the little weak ones. We're like, okay, you can go now. Amalek, you're gonna let him go? Right? Because they're in a certain sense helpful for the power of the Jewish spirit to kill our enemies. That we need to remember that all the time, that we have this power of nitzachon. It's an eternal memory that we have to continually conjure up. That's why we keep the misnagdim in the story all the time. We won't let him go. Thank you. Because yes, it defeated the Vilna Gaon. That's a big statement. Right? Okay. And that's why there's such a thing called a war is to bring out your power of victory, right? War, that's what I'm trying to say. In a certain sense, Hashem wants there to be, in a certain sense, war, because even any expert in any field, right? If there's no one around to compete with, what do the great ones say? I compete with myself. You're not good enough to compete with me. I already beat all the records, but I'm not done winning. I have to now beat my own records. That's how it goes, because you need to fight in order to bring out nitzachon, which is your essential self. However, he says, in milchama, har yesh beis inyanim. When it comes to war, there's two different kinds of war. Echad lishlol shalal libos bas. One is to just take the treasures and the riches and the bounty of the enemy. In other words, you're not fighting for the sake of the identity of the country. David HaMelech also fought wars like this. In other words, we need more money in this country, right? Let's go fight a war with one of our enemies and take all their stuff. So this is like a war of expansion. Ba'beis, the second, however, in the milchama hu lahotzi nitzchono, that the purpose of the war is simply to win. That's why you're fighting, to win, not to get something out of it. You're not trying to gain any valuables. The purpose of fighting is to win. Shia kirtzono, right? That things should go my way. And my desire. And the truth is that the other war is like a war with a borrowed name almost. The real concept of war is just to win. You're not fighting to get the trophy. You're not fighting even to get a piece of land, right? You're just fighting because you have an opinion and they have an opinion, and I'm going to win. The whole concept is to bring out your victorious qualities. The war to merely take bounty, that does not actually draw upon your essential self. When we talk about Hashem, it's called tzivakos, and this is the unit of netzach, and therefore it draws upon his intense level of essence, nishava, Kadosh Baruch Hu, his greatest desire. That's not a war just to get bounty, right? A war to get bounty does not tap into those types of essential powers. It's just a war of might, right? In other words, which means to say that if someone if you're busy trying to fight a war to get stuff, and you wind up starting to lose too many men, right? It's almost like the difference between, you could say, like Ukraine and Russia right now, right? Why is Ukraine fighting, and why is Russia fighting? And why is this war taking so much longer than even anybody thought? For this exact reason. Because Ukraine is not fighting to get anything. On the contrary, every day they just lose more things. But they're fighting to win their existence, right? I'm not defending any side over here. I'm just telling you a story, right? They're the, so to speak, the underdogs. If they win, they get to live, right? If Russia wins, they get another piece of land, and therefore you don't fight with the same enthusiasm and intensity. That's why the underdog sometimes comes up on top. For example, the Jews always come up on top, because when they push us to the edge, we whip out a can of nitzachon, and that's it. Like you're fighting against, all of a sudden, like Mamash, David, Goliath cannot beat such a person, because what you get out of this and what we get out of this are two different things. So because when you're fighting to get something, if you're not getting it and you're losing all your men, eventually you stop. Right? Russia is a big country with a lot of resources. They could just keep pouring it on. But the reason why it's taking so long is because they can't fight with the same passion and intensity. They're not fighting to win. They're fighting to gain. It's a completely different type of warfare. A little political analysis, if you Okay, so this is the Indian of war. Real war, which is a tremendous wisdom how to fight a war. You're going to pull out the greatest wisdom. You're going to come up with the most unbelievable tactics when it comes to basically you're needing to be right. You know, there's a story about the Benos Tzlafchad, where basically their father didn't have any sons, and Moshe was busy giving out the inheritance of the land. And it says they came themselves before Moshe and Aaron and the whole Beis Din and the Sanhedrin, and they came up with arguments that convinced the whole court system that they had to go get like an answer from Hashem. And Moshe was like, "Excuse me, I have to ask God." And he came back. He says, "Yes, they spoke properly, right?" Because why? Because again, they were fighting for their lives, so their wisdom even. The powers of intellect and all that they had was somehow came to the fore, that they were able to bring forth arguments that even the great sages couldn't bring forth because it was so meaningful to them. They had to win. So this is really like what comes out of a war of needing to win is not just the power of nitzachon, but it brings with it every single thing you got in your bag. Because if you're going to win, you need the best skills, you need the best intelligence, you need the best everything. אמנם גם זה עניין הניצחון הוא דווקא כשיש מנגד המונע מעכב ואז שייך ניצחון. But however, even if you want to win and your will needs to come out, you have, so to speak, this power of nitzachon inside of you. If you don't have an opponent, it won't come out. So you can have this quality, but it's just latent inside of you until someone actually comes against you to try and stop you and hold you back. You will not reveal your essential quality of being able to win. And so therefore an opponent is in a certain way extremely helpful for you. Like I said, if I can't compete with you guys, I'm going to compete with myself. I got to compete with someone. I have to win because that's what's going to bring out my best. Without an opponent, it's not even relevant to win at all. This quality of nitzachon. And the king is just going to go along running his country in accordance with his will, nothing standing against his will. So naturally his will reign, and therefore he doesn't have to dig so deep in order to ensure that. But he wants something and someone's going to oppose it. Then he's going to stand up against this guy and he's going to reveal a sphera which otherwise would have stayed in its state of concealment, which is nitzachon, netzach. It doesn't come out otherwise. Now this is a very classic line here, that what's he going to do in order to win this war if need be? Like I said, you're going to bring up the best arguments, you're going to bring up your most intense weaponry, right? You're going to bring out your best soldiers. The king, in order to, if it comes out that someone's actually opposing his will and he has to bring out netzach, then he will flaunt in a wasting way all the deep treasures that have been in his storehouses. Midor achar dor, and he's not afraid to bring out these qualities, that these treasures that have been gathered and collected over many, many years and generation after generation. It's like piles and piles of riches that have been since the first King Arthur, right? Like everything that the country has, all of its resources, if it comes out, I think the late Queen of England, I think they say she was basically the richest person in the world. She owned like the ocean or something, right? And the reality is, if it came down to it, that Britain was under attack in the way of it was existential battle, every single, if she was a true queen, every single last pound would have come out, pence, and been floundered and wasted. You would give every single thing and just to preserve it. So you see what the nitzachon can do. It can unleash all of the riches that have been stockpiled for generation after generation after generation. Things which normally, as you're going to say in a second, not only were not flaunted, we're not even used, and we're not even allowed to be seen by anybody. So you see, again, secrets of the country, top secret, confidential matters, it will all just get exposed and thrown out there when it comes for a need of existential nature. That these treasures were never used for anything. And not only that, but they're hidden from the eye even. No one's even allowed to see the treasures. At the time of Nitzuach HaMilchama, winning the war, not only does he open and have a look and use them, he flaunts them, he just throws them out in as fast as he can, emptying out his riches. And why is this? Because the midah of nitzachon, this is a very high thing, especially if you know a little bit about the spheros. The midah of nitzachon is higher than ratzon and oneg, right? Ratzon and oneg is basically chitzonius and pnimius hakeser. How can you go beyond pnimius hakeser? What's beyond pnimius hakeser? It's pretty much as high as the thing goes. What midah is there? What quality is there that is higher than pnimius hakeser? There isn't any. There's chokhmah, arich, atik. And if you're going to say there's pnimius atik, fine, but that's also mamish atik. It's also keser. What he's talking about here is the essence of Hashem himself. This goes all the way up inside to where there is no more spheros and no more qualities. It touches on the essence. By the way, netzach is, if you think about it, is the sphera, which is not all the way up there. There is a midah of netzach, and it's actually down below. It's not chokhmah, it's not bin, it's not das, it's not chesed, it's not gevurah, nor tiferes. It's only after all that. So why are you saying that this little netzach at the bottom of the pole is higher than ratzon and oneg? It's higher than the highest part of Kesser. How does that make any sense? It's not. It's down there. Remember we said when we started this class, when we started talking about netzach, what was we really went into it, but we have to end now. But what was the quality of netzach? What is netzach doing down there? And why is it below chesed, gevurah, and tiferes? Does anyone remember what we said?
The victorious level of chesed.
That's right, because chesed can sometimes just be in the heart. But if you're gonna wind up, if you want to take out the trash, because you love me, you're gonna take out the trash, right? But it's pouring rain outside, and it's stuck in the bag, and basically you tried to get it out and it ripped. And so now what are you gonna do? Like, it's a mess of a situation. You thought, I'll take out the trash. I love this guy. But now to take out the trash and show your love, you have to almost overcome crazy obstacles. So that's called netzach, right? That's why netzach is lower than chesed. It is just chesed. It's just when chesed has to go through the hoop and ladder in order to just be itself. So again, it's winning that war. And that's why, even though netzach is below, we really are saying that it comes from the essence. Because in order to get netzach to come out, you have to pull from something which is higher than will and pleasure. Which means it's unpleasurable for me and it's unwillful for me to do this. Why am I going to do it anyway? If it's defied by will and my pleasure, why would I do this? Because it's my essence is involved over here. Something higher than will and pleasure.